I would like to begin. Now, by the way, the Bible study, I know you forgot, but we were in the book of Revelation a couple months ago. And we got through to chapter 16. And we're going to begin and try to cover chapter 17 and 18 today. And most of you know what is in chapter 17 and 18 and all of that. But before we go there, I do have a couple questions, and I'll cover them first. Then I'm going to go there and get my stuff here kind of sorted out so I don't confuse myself. But the first question that I was given, and where did I put it? I know I had it here. Yes, here it is. Can you provide the church's understanding on who, quote, the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God, are mentioned in Revelation 12 and verse 17? Well, yes, I can. We have an article. I had to go back and look at that. Now, of course, we covered chapter 12, and chapter 12 of Revelation is really all about the church. Of course, Satan also involved there, but you're familiar with the church being taken into the wilderness to a place of safety for 3.5 years. And in verse 17, but maybe I can go back here a page or two and take a look at that. In chapter 12 and verse 17, where are we here? Okay. And the dragon, which is Satan the devil, was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Now the woman he goes to make war with is the church. And we have an article here, and I made, in fact, I'll give it to the person who asked me the question after church. But who are the woman, child, and dragon in Revelation 12? And of course, we go through it. It's by your former pastor, David Trabig. And so you know it's got to be good, right? It is very good. He's a very good writer, too, and good researcher. Let me just see here. There's the one question, place. Oh, yes. It's actually 5 pages long, but on page 4, there's just this short paragraph I will read in answer to the question I received. Satan then goes to, quote, make war with the rest of her, the woman's offspring, who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ, parentheses, Revelation 12:17. From this passage, we note that while some members of God's true church will be protected from Satan's wrath during these end times prior to Christ's return, others will not. Those not in the place of protection will need to prove their allegiance to God the Father and Christ in the face of Satan's intense persecution. So there's the official answer in writing. And all of these articles, by the way, it doesn't matter who writes them. It goes through the doctrinal committee. Everything is looked to see if there's any error in what we believe, what we teach, what the Bible teaches on all of it. So yes, it is official. And the individual can see me, and you can have this. Or if any of you want it, you can just go online. You can put in either Revelation 12 or under search, or who are the woman, child, and dragon in Revelation 12. And the article will come up, and you can print it out if you'd like. Then I have another question, which might take a little bit more to answer. Would you please explain the wave sheaf offering this year when a Sabbath did not fall between the first day of unleavened bread and the last day of unleavened bread? Well, that's very interesting. I remember the first time I heard that was years ago, I think in the 70s somewhere. And let me give you the short answer first, and then I'll tell you how the church came to that. The wave sheaf would have been on the first holy day, which was on a Sunday, as you know, the first day of the week. Why was that? Because if you did it after the seventh day, which last week fell on the weekly Sabbath. Remember, I'm going to go back through this with you. I'm just trying to give you the summary. Then you would be having the wave sheaf after unleavened bread, not during unleavened bread. Okay? So did the church then arbitrarily decide that back in the... No, there is an example in the Bible, and I'd like to take a few moments. I'll go to that. It's in Joshua, the 5th chapter. When the first year that they came into the promised land, crossing the Jordan River. In Joshua chapter 5, and actually I've got three different scriptures here, translations I'm going to use. I printed them out, so I won't turn to read all of this, but I can read it here on these papers that I have. Now, in Joshua, in Joshua 5, verses 10 through 12, in the New King James Version, because I'm going to read another version momentarily. Verse 10, now the children of Israel camped in Gilgal and kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at twilight on the plains of Jericho. By the way, that's one of 14 scriptures in the Old Testament, it's interesting, that says the Passover is on the 14th. 14 for the 14th, none for the 15th. Verse 11, and they ate of the produce of the land on the day after the Passover, which would be the 15th, the first holy day, right? Unleavened bread and parched grain, indicating here it's the old grain, the parched grain of the land, on the very same day, okay? So they eat this on, which day is it? On the 15th, right? And it's the old grain, right? It's the parched and so forth that they eat on that day. Now, it's interesting. And then verse 12, then the manna ceased on the day after they had eaten the produce of the land, and the children of Israel no longer had manna, but they ate the food of the land of Canaan that year. Now, what's interesting in verse 12, they're eating the produce of the land, the new produce. Now, you can't do that. You know why? You can only do that after the wave sheaf. See, they ate both on that day, and the next day there was no manna anymore. Hold your place here, if you would. I don't need to turn back because I have it written here. Oh, one other thing before we turn back. Let me read the King James Version of this. I think it adds a little to it, makes it a little more understandable. Usually it's the other way around, right? Well, this time I would give the weight to understanding to the original King James. Verse 11, and they did eat of the old corn. Now, corn shouldn't be there because they didn't discover corn for about another 2,000 years. It should be actually either grain or produce. But the point here is the word old that is in the King James Version. That tells us a little, it makes it more clear to us. And they did eat of the old corn of the land on the morrow after the Passover, unleavened cakes and parched corn in the selfsame day. Now, the word morrow in the King James doesn't mean the day portion of the 14th. If you look it up, it means the day after or the next day, which would be the 15th. And so that means that the New King James, in saying the day after, is correct. So, let me see, verse 12. And the manna ceased on the morrow after they had eaten of the old corn of the land. When did they eat of that? On the 15th. Neither had the children of Israel manna anymore, but they did eat of the fruit of the land of Canaan that year. The new fruit that was coming in, barley, spring wheat. It's almost like an army when they live off the land as they invade, don't they? A lot of them do. I remember my great-great-grandfather did with Sherman's March to the Sea and the Civil War. They lived off of the land as they marched down from Chattanooga through Atlanta. They came in here, this isn't just wild growth out there. The Canaanites were people that they had to eat too. It was what they had planted. And so here you had the new stuff coming up, and that's what they were going to eat. Now, one other translation here before I go to Leviticus 23. is the Tanakh, which is the acronym for the Jewish translation of the Old Testament into English. Verse 11, on the day after the Passover offering, on that very day, that'd be the 15th, they ate of the I added old, but they ate of the produce of the country that already was there, unleavened bread and parched grain. Verse 12 then says, on that same day that they ate the old grain, when they ate of the produce of the land, the manna ceased. Now the Israelites got no more manna that year. They ate of the yield of the land of Canaan. Okay? They are eating both. They start out eating the old, but they also now begin to eat the produce, the present produce of the land. With that in mind, let's go to Leviticus 23, and I'll read it to you. And during the days of unleavened bread, you have the wave sheaf. Verse 9 of chapter 23, and this is New King James. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them that when you come into the land which I give to you and reap its harvest, you reap its harvest, that's what they were doing, picking some of the spring produce, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. So first of all, sheaf, tie it up, bring it to the priest. He offers it, waves it to heaven for the Lord to accept it. And of course, we know that it represents Jesus Christ. Verse 11 of Leviticus 23, he shall wave the sheep before the Lord to be accepted on your behalf. On the day after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it. Now we know that word there, Shabbat, means the weekly Sabbath, not the annual Sabbath, which the Pharisees always used the annual Sabbath. The Sadducees, who controlled the temple, did not, and during the time of Christ. Okay, let me back up here again. Verse 10, Leviticus 23, when you come into the land, they had just come into the land, just before the Passover. You'll see that if you read the first part of chapter 5 there of Joshua. So when you come into the land, which I give to you, and you reap its harvest, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of the harvest to the priest. Let me summarize what's happened here. They could not have eaten the new fruit of the land unless there had been a wave sheaf offering made by the priest on that Sunday, that first day of the feast. Now, a lot of things it tells us here by the fact if they ate the old produce on the day after the Passover, which is the 15th, which is the first day of the week. By the way, the wave sheaf is always on a Sunday on the first day. Why? Because it has to follow the Sabbath. It followed the Sabbath of the 14th. Passover fell on the 14th, not only this year, but that year as well, because they ate also on the 15th the new produce. You can't do that unless you have cut a sheaf and the priest has gone through the ceremony of the wave sheaf. Then you can eat it the rest of the day. The manna stopped. No more manna. And so that's why, to answer the person's question here about, let me read it again so I can get it straight. And I covered it up. Here it is. Would you please explain the wave sheaf offering this year when a Sabbath did not fall between the first day and the last day of unleavened bread? Well, to have it during the days of unleavened bread, which, by the way, Leviticus 23 shows that it has to be, then you have to take the Sabbath before the first holy day. And that's what we see they did in Joshua 5. Because they could not have eaten they ate the old, which they could do, but in order to eat the new produce, there had to be a way. It doesn't say that. And after the wave sheaf, they then began to eat the produce of the land. Well, we have to assume that they did, that they followed the commandment of Leviticus 23. They had come into the land, and they could not eat of the new produce until the wave sheaf. They had to pick, first of all, to make a sheaf until it was waved in heaven and the ceremony was carried out. By the way, the Jewish people call that an actual holy day. They say that there are 3 holy days during the days of unleavened bread, which is false. Why do they do that? Well, because they ignore the 8th day of the feast in the fall. They don't know what to do with it, have no idea. The one thing about you'll find in your Bible, if you go to Leviticus 23, above verse 9, it says Feast of First Fruits. That is the beginning of the Feast of First Fruits, which ends on Pentecost, or Feast of Weeks. And so that ceremony, once that ceremony is carried out on Sunday morning, first day of the week, then they can harvest for the next 50 days, and it has to end on the Feast of Weeks, or what we call Pentecost today. So I hope that explained it to you. And it's hard in one sense to you got to look at several different translations there to begin. And I appreciate what was in the King James using the word old, because that's what it was. They eat of the old or the parched grain until the wave sheaf has been offered. On the 15th in this case. If it was offered on the 15th, how do I know? Well, because they ate of the new grain afterwards, and the manna ceased. There's no more manna. So that means that it fell. Now, I remember when this came up back, I don't remember the year, but I remember the discussion at the time was over this very point, because somewhere back there, one of the years in the 1970s, I believe it was, it fell this way, and it periodically does, as it did this year. And I remember to make it simple, the ceremony has to be done within the days of, not outside of the days of unleavened bread. The Pharisees, by the way, on a year like this, they would have done it outside. And I think there are still some groups that do, possibly Messianic Jews, look at it that way, counting the last holy day because it falls on the weekly Sabbath. Okay, so they're going to do it the next day, which is Sunday, but the feast is over. And we see that, no, they did it within the feast. That's why we follow this example that we see here in Joshua for today. All right. That, I think, covers everything there that I want to cover. Now I want to go to Revelation chapter 17. What do you think is the main topic in these 2 chapters, huh? There have been a lot of books written about this woman who rides the beast. And in fact, I have one right here. It's called A Woman Who Rides the Beast by David Hunt. 500 plus pages. The reason I brought it is there are other books here that you can have. A lot of you have heard of and probably have a copy of Alexander Hislop's The Two Babylons, written, I think, about 1886, somewhere back there. David Hunt's book is more of a historical book, written in 1994, which is still available for $14.89 on Amazon. And the same book is a copy I have here. Quite a few people were getting this back in the 1990s. And I found it very interesting. Sometimes, like with Hislop, I remember the criticism and kind of modern day criticism, well, he's so biased against the Roman Catholic Church. Well, yes. I mean, he's not going to be pro-Roman Catholic Church. He's writing in his, I mean, how could you be neutral? Or anytime. The key is not whether the person is biased. Obviously, you got to be biased if you're writing here the history of it. But how do you substantiate what you're writing? If you really have good evidence, good quotes, good information, then you can't just write it off and dismiss it. So it's a good one for the history of it. And we have some good things here also here in our book on the book of Revelation, page 26 and 7. We cover these two chapters. And I'll maybe make a reference here in a moment to our booklet and read a quote from it. But in chapter 17 and verse 1, then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and talked with me, saying to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters." The waters, letting the Bible interpret itself, you will find in verse 15, when we'll be coming to that shortly. Of course, there are many peoples and tongues and multitudes and even nations. So this great harlot sits on many waters. The interesting thing, Hislop, of course, called it the two Babylons. The original Babylon, the first of the great kingdoms that is mentioned in Daniel 2 and again in Daniel 7. But who is the second one? The second one is a religious system, as we will see here. And it's called here a harlot, a woman. Many times symbolically in the Bible, a woman is a church, just as we see that the woman in chapter 12 is really God's church, the church Jesus Christ is head of, the church that will be protected and taken into the wilderness for 3.5 years. But here we have this other church. I've mentioned, I might as well mention it again here. I don't know if I mentioned it to this audience or not, but a number of years ago when my wife and I and our family were in Ohio, and I had the Mansfield and Findlay, Ohio churches, I'm in my office one morning just doing whatever I'm doing, and I get this phone call. And this lady told me that she was a nun and that she was in the part of the convent outside of Findlay, Ohio. And so I'm listening to her a little bit, and she apparently had been taking our literature and looked at it. And she said, "I know who it is talking about in Revelation 17 and 18. And I know that they want to try to put me into a mental institute because I've been talking about it." And I never heard from this lady again. I mean, we had quite an interesting and fairly long conversation. And I let her do a lot of the talking. She seemed to be very rational and very sound in everything that she was doing. I wished I would have heard from her again, but I never did. But it's quite interesting that they did not want her to read the book of Revelation. And that if apparently she had been, or she had been reading our literature at the time, this would have been back probably, well, we were there from 82 to 89. I would say it was about 83 or 84 when I got that phone call. And it was really quite an interesting phone call. I would never expect, of course, but I have certainly not forgotten it. Well, let's go on here. Who sits on many waters, verse 2, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, spiritual fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. And of course, all of this is symbolic, and we're talking here spiritually that they have gone along with and accepted and been a part of the whole religious process here that comes from this particular woman. Verse 3, so he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The 7 heads and 10 horns we see with the 4th kingdom, do we not? Rome. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. Now, this is Jesus Christ giving us through his angel to John to record. And so it shows us exactly how God looks at these things. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. I'd like to share a little bit here, a few quotes from our own booklet, by the way. The book of Revelation, The Storm Before the Calm. Again, this is written primarily, I believe, well, I see my name is here too, but I think David Trebig wrote most of this. It's been so long, I've forgotten a little bit of everything that when we were doing articles. Some articles then became part of the booklet and that we have, and I think it's even been refreshed since it was originally written. But here under subtitled Mystery Babylon the Great, the reference to Babylon indicates that just as Babylon, the first of the four empires foretold by God in the book of Daniel, had spread and enforced its false, idolatrous form of worship, so would this woman, this mother of harlots, while appearing to be Christian, would produce daughters with similar false doctrines, teachings that would be in opposition to what Jesus and his disciples taught. It's page 26 of this booklet on the book of Revelation. One other one, and I just, this will be the second and last one I want to read from this booklet. What do all these biblical clues about the identity of the false religious system add up to? What great religious power has been associated with the revivals of the Roman Empire? What religious system has taken upon itself to change the biblical seventh-day Sabbath and holy days and other laws of the Bible? Which religious system has persecuted and even martyred those who continue to keep the Sabbath, Passover, and other laws of the Bible? Which religious system has adopted festivals and worship practices from ancient paganism and has passed on such teachings to its, quote, daughter, end quote, churches? What church has had great influence over the kings and emperors of Europe and is inseparably associated with Rome? Well, the answer is quite obvious to look when we do at any such thing as that, or that subject. All right, let's move along here. Verse 6, I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus, and when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. But the angel said to me, why did you marvel? I will tell you the mystery. And what is the mysterion is, I believe, the Greek word. And it means the hidden truth, the hidden truth. I tell you the hidden truth or the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The beast that you saw was and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition or destruction. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. Now, I think the better translation there, written in the book of life since the foundation of the world. Since it makes is a little bit better rendering of that, because names are added to it since, not as though it was there before. Let's see, written in the book of life from the foundation or since the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and is not and yet is. That is quite interesting, by the way. You think about the resurrections. The beast that was, which did go down in 476 AD, Rome did. And then it says, and is. This also is very interesting for the time of the end. The beast that was and is not, and yet it is. Now here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains or governments or kingdoms on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 have, this is interesting, obviously this is for our time. There are 7 kings. 5 have fallen up through, Napoleon. And 1 is. This would be what we would consider, I would say, in World War II. The Mussolini and Hitler and the Axis. And the other has not yet come. We've been waiting for it, all of our generation. Now this, actually verse 10 here is written for the time of the end, obviously. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. So you look at that. 5 have fallen. Well, who are they? Justinian, 554. Charlemagne, 800. Otto the Great, 992, I think it is, or 62. Charles V, number 4, or Charles the Great of the Habsburgs in 1520. Napoleon, number 5. When did he come to power? That was what, 1805, I think, until 1814. And then we have quite a number of years go by. We've, in our literature, in fact, in the other book that I didn't bring with me, that I brought and used before, How to Understand Prophecy, we have the old form in there showing a lot of this. We start in 1870 with the unification of Italy and Garibaldi in 1870, leading up to really 1936. Mussolini declared himself emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. And of course, it wasn't much of an empire for his. The power and the strength was with being allied with the Germans and Adolf Hitler. And all of that. There was a lot of things about World War II that seemed to be types of the time of the end. The years that we were involved in the war with Germany and Italy was exactly 3.5 years. The Axis powers were, Japan became a part of the Axis powers before they bombed Pearl Harbor. After they did on the December the 7th, then on December the 8th, Hitler declared war against the United States and went to the Bundestag on December the 11th, I guess, to get it official and all that, although if he declared it on the 8th, it already was. But if you look at that, December 8th, 1941, go 3.5 years forward, and guess what you come up to? May the 8th, 1945, Germany surrenders to the Allied powers. 3.5 years. Is that just a coincidence? Kind of wonder about that, right? I know Mr. Armstrong always thought when he saw the Germans crossing North Africa that this was it. And it was only later that he realized, I guess after Montgomery stopped him at Al Alamein, and then came the invasion of Sicily and Italy and so on, that it was not going to be at that time. But when he would go up there to Seattle and get ready for the Sunday morning broadcast and go to the ticker tape of the, what was it, AP, United, whichever one it was that he was looking at, to see what's the latest coming in from the war. And saw, here you got Rommel crossing North Africa, what? Headed to Suez and what? The glorious land. Daniel 11, verse 40, I think it is. And so yes, you would too if you understood enough about prophecy in those days, and that would have looked like, well, I guess this must be it. And but it wasn't time, but it had similarities. Now, we're going to see that in the final one, this particular woman's going to be more involved with that beast, the 7th resurrection of it, or the 10th, however you're looking at, head or a horn. 10 horns or 7 heads, right? It's the same one. And be much more involved with that individual as I guess like a partnership. All right, let's pick it up here and go on. I was down to verse 10. Let's go to verse 11. The beast that was and is not, and is himself also the 8th, and is of the 7, and is going into perdition. Now that's been confusing to a lot of people, but as I've always understood it and heard it explained, that the 8th is the composite of the original 7. and that this beast was, Rome was, and had its deadly wound. Back here in chapter 13, it said that it would have a deadly wound. It did, 476. But guess what? It comes back from that deadly wound. It was, but it now is not. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. Now, I don't know this an hour in the sense that you and I keep time and think of an hour of 60 minutes, but it means a short, obviously, time. How long is this in prophecy? I don't know. Now, we know that a day is as a year in prophecy, and there are a couple scriptures, of course, that tell us that. But how long is 1 hour? I don't think it's 60 minutes. It's obviously just a short period of time. That, again, we don't know what really that is. Verse 13, these are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. 10 kings, and of course, ever since the Treaty of Rome in 1957, in which, 7, 8 nations came together there to form that economic treaty, and then later, was it 1972, you had the European Union form. And what do we have? 26, 27 countries in the European Union today. We've always believed and taught that out of these unions, which are economic unions trying to be able to develop their economies and so forth, that 10 nations will rise, and out of them in the time of the end will be what the Bible calls a beast, and most likely Germanic individual from Germany, which, by the way, German elections are this coming September. You might want to keep an eye on who takes Mrs. Merkel's place, and a little bit about him. You never know, by the way, if I can just say this. Years ago, Gamal Abdel Nasser, very handsome, strong-looking man who was the president of Egypt. And then one day he dropped dead of a heart attack. And this other man came along we'd never heard of, who was, looked like he really needed, maybe he was suffering from malnutrition, or just skinny. This guy didn't look very strong. He certainly wasn't a Gamal Abdel Nasser. Well, he turned out to be Anwar Sadat, and he was quite a leader. So you never know, do you? I remember I was a trainee at the time, and the pastor I worked under said, well, you don't have to worry about this individual doing anything in Egypt. And why, look how weak he is. Describing, turned out to be far greater than Gamal Abdel Nasser. So you never know. You don't want to go by appearance. Remember that? That's why God said Samuel to the kid out there in the field, what's his name, David? That's the one. Anoint him. So I say that when you see somebody, you never know who that will turn out to be, but you can't go by appearance, and that'd make a big mistake. All right, going on. Verse 14, these will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called, chosen, and faithful. Us, and those resurrected when he returns. But they make war with the Lamb. They attack him. You may have heard over the years that these armies will actually attack Jesus Christ. And there it is, right there in verse, verse 14. And yes, they are, because they're going to be there. They're going to look at him as, I don't know what in their mind they're thinking, that, he will, I guess, look physical to them. If it was invisible, they wouldn't be attacking, would they? They're attacking something that they think is quite real and a threat to them, and indeed he is. Verse 15, then he said to me, the waters which you saw in verse 1, where the harlot sits, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. And when you look and see the size of this particular religious organization and church, it's over 1 billion, isn't it? Not million, billion, who claim to be part. Now, let me just back up something else. It's amazing to me, and it is to you, that educated people, knowing everything about the background, the physical background, everything about this particular church, join it, want to be a part of it. Because you and I think, well, can't you see how sensible and how biblically correct the doctrines are that we follow? That they would just laugh at and call us a cult over keeping. It's amazing how Satan has deceived the whole world. It's been probably a few years ago now. Mr. Bennett, I forgot his first name, who used to be the Secretary of Secretary of Education under Ronald Reagan. He now is he speaks a lot of times on Fox News. Well, a few years ago, he became a part of the Roman Catholic Church. He's a very well-educated man. He's written a lot of very nice books, by the way, good books. Well, then later, Laura Engel, I remember I happened to just to be watching, I was at the time, who has her own show there, and she joined the church. And they were actually giving some commentary together, and he said to her, well, welcome to the church, and everything. And I'm sitting there thinking they're both well educated. Laura Engel served under Chief Justice, the black Justice Thomas, before she went into her own radio program and then into television. But it makes me, I remember Rush Limbaugh. I happened one day to hear him when I was in the car, had his program on, and I'm driving somewhere. And he mentioned how that he had seriously considered joining the Roman Catholic Church. You know, it makes you you stop and think. These people, when I went to college at Portland State College, now university as it was back in '64 and '5, and you had to take Western civilization. And we had a very good instructor and teacher, and he handled it, I thought, very, very well. See, I had been in the Bible correspondence course when I was taking that class, and so when we came into the Catholic Church in Europe, every time, this was, I was at the original course, it was the 58 lessons, and I was somewhere way up there, so that had to be in the 40s, where we got this information, and what he is giving us, I just had gotten it from the church, either in our booklets or in the CC. And, all of these people I just mentioned just a few moments ago, they know that. They took the same courses in their college career too as freshmen in college. That's why, it's an amazing thing. An amazing thing to me how, brilliant people, well-educated people, and yet, I don't know what it's like. It's like joining the country club or something. The Bible doesn't seem to matter in one way or the other, or history itself. But how can you be? By the way, one other thing, and I'll move on. Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel went to visit the Pope here a few years ago. Not too many years ago, a few years back. Do you know what he gave the Pope? When you come before a dignitary, you give him a gift. His gift to the previous Pope, was a book that his father wrote on the Spanish Inquisition. The Roman Catholic Church has never accepted responsibility for the hundreds and thousands who were put to death. Now, the Pope didn't receive it with a smile, but he handed it to him. It was very interesting that he would come and give a copy of his father's book on the Spanish Inquisition to the Pope. All right, that's enough digression. Let's finish and get in here a little bit further. Verse 15. Then he said to me, the waters, while I read that, verse 16, and the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. So something's going to happen toward the end of the tribulation period, and the unity or the between the church and the state is going to break up. I don't know. We'll just have to, if we're alive, hopefully in a safe place, watch how it plays out. I don't know how else what to say. Verse 17, for God has put it into their hearts to fulfill his purpose, to be of one mind, and to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman whom you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. Well, that's simple to understand. When John wrote this, there's only one city that did. And it has reigned over the kings of the earth and of Europe in particular down through the centuries. Chapter 18, verse 1. After these things I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen. That is not an original statement, is it? Because if you have a center margin right there, you'll notice that that is in Isaiah chapter 13 and in verse 19. And I think I read that before. I know I did. I've gone back. It was the previous Bible study or it was on the day of the Lord. I think I spoke on it or something and went back there. But a lot of the statements you find here in the book of Revelation, I'll show you some more. We will go back to the book of Isaiah before we finish the 18th chapter. That this was prophesied in bits and pieces, if you will, in the Old Testament. And Jesus Christ gives it to John, puts it together. And it's interesting how you find there's an awful lot about this second Babylon, smothered here and there in Isaiah 13:47, Jeremiah 50 and 51. We'll look at some of those here in just a little bit. Verse 3, for all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. Well, for business sake and political sake, because you got all these people here that attend that church and are part of it, I better saddle up to her. You know, it's just like the situation down here where the Georgia law, the All-Star game has moved out. Delta Airlines, Coca-Cola, United Airlines, they all go against the state of Georgia, not even knowing why. So just not understanding. That's exactly what these kings of the earth do. It is to my political salvation and so forth, wherever I am in Europe, because the whole population of my country is a member of that church. So, and they got churches all over the place. So I better be, cozy up. And if I want to do business as a merchant, I better become a Catholic. And you've heard many times how people join churches and so forth. They don't really have a deep commitment. They just go there because it's good. That's where the leadership of the community or whatever they attend. My high school principal, we would talk at times because he'd come out. I was in athletics. He'd like to come out and be around the teams as they practiced after school. And sometimes we would talk. And it was in the spring of the year. I don't remember the year now. But I remember him very well, and he said, well, Easter's coming. I guess I better go to church. He hadn't been to church, and well, I guess since the previous Easter. It was just a matter of kind of going along with the crowd and that type of thing in the community. Now, going on here in verse 4, and I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, lest you receive of her plagues. Now, I have used this particular verse, and I think in reference to people who have left the truth in the past. Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins. Her doctrines, her teachings, every one of them, accepting them, starting with the Trinity, and going into the no longer, now the Catholic Church under, was it the previous Pope, who said that they need to return to the Sabbath meeting Sunday. And the doctrines, when people, when we were all, and I'll just say it, and worldwide, you know it, what was everybody returning to? What kind of doctrines? Was it just Protestant mainstream? Or where did Protestant mainstream get its doctrines? And so I just say, I hope and pray that people, he says, come out of her, my people, and lest you share in her sins. And God is very merciful. He gives us time to repent and to return. It's an interesting thing. I've had some people return to the church and have been very fine members in the church since 1995 who had been out of the church for a considerable number of years. Still, there was something there. God was working. God's Spirit was there. And so I think this is talking to us. I mean, to all and to those who used to be a part of us. And for her sins have reached to heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Render to her just as she rendered to you, and repay her double according to her works in the cup which she has mixed, and mixed double for her. In the measure that she glorified herself, lived luxuriously or sensuously, spiritually speaking, center margin, in the same measure give her torment and sorrow, for she says in her heart, I sit as a queen, and am no widow, and will not see sorrow. I will be forever. I am the eternal city and church. Now, I'm going to stop here and go back to Isaiah 47. In Isaiah 47, it's very interesting, some of the comments that we're going to read in the book of Revelation, chapter 18. In chapter 47 of Isaiah, subtitle above it, The Humiliation of Babylon, come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. The daughter of Babylon, right? Sit on the ground without a throne, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for you shall no more be called tender and delicate. Let's go down verse 5. Sit in silence, go into darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for you shall no longer be called the Lady of Kingdoms. I was angry with my people. I have profaned my inheritance and given them into your hand, and you showed them no mercy. And on the elderly you laid your yoke very heavily. Verse 7, and you said, I shall be a lady forever. Ever read anything, you're going to see it there in chapter 18. So that you did not take these things to heart, nor remember the latter end of them. Therefore hear this now, you who are given to pleasures, who dwell securely, who say in your heart, I am. Now that's very significant, and there is no one else besides me. Where do you find that in the Bible? Exodus 3:8-14, right? At the burning bush. Who are you? Who should I say that sent us? You tell him, I am. John, 8:58. Before Abraham was, I am. Now you'll see that this is not the only place in this chapter where this daughter of Babylon claims to be I am, and there is no one else besides me. That's quite blasphemous. But you know the titles taken. And I've seen there have been a number brought out in various writers and so forth of the titles taken by the hierarchy of that church. They're very most reverent. His Holiness, the Holy Father. Blasphemy. Going on, verse 8. Therefore hear this now, you who are given to pleasures, who dwell secure. And again, I read that. Let's drop down to verse 9. But these two things shall come to you in a moment. Now notice this. In a moment, in one day, the loss of children and widowhood, they shall come upon you in their fullness, because of the multitude of your sorceries, for the great abundance of your enchantments. Now, that certainly was very clear in the first Babylon, but it's a different way spiritually in the second Babylon. Its doctrines are as sorceries. Do you pray to God in Jesus' name, or do you pray to a woman? Mary is considered God. Where does that come in the Bible? Going on, a couple others, I'll drop down here. Well, verse 10. The latter part of verse 10. And you have said in your heart, I am, and there is no one else besides me. Therefore, evil shall come upon you, and you shall not know from where it arises. Keep that in mind when we finish chapter 18. And desolation shall come upon you suddenly. Stand now with your enchantments and the multitude of your sorceries. And finally, let me just drop down to verse 15. Thus shall they be to you with whom you have labored, your merchants from your youth. They shall wander each one to his quarter. No one shall save you. All right, now let's go back to chapter 18 of Revelation. To save time, I was going to read a little bit from Isaiah 13, Jeremiah 50, Jeremiah 51, talking about, again, the daughter of Babylon, and you'll see phrases as you go there. Now, in Jeremiah 50 and 51 is talking about the original Babylon, but as you read along, you'll see that there is a jump in time. Wait a minute, this doesn't describe the original, although the previous verses did. It's going forward here talking about the one actually that we're going to read about here in chapter 18. Now I stopped at verse 6, so let's start in verse 7 of chapter 18. In the measure that she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, I did read that, didn't I? Sensuously, in the same measure give her torment and sorrow, for she says in her heart that I sit as queen and am no widow and will not see sorrow. Verse 8, therefore her plagues will come in one day. Didn't we read that in verse back there in chapter 47? In one day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be utterly burned with fire. For strong is the Lord God who judges her. Now, we see here in chapter 17 and in verse, 16, that those 10 kings are going to turn on her and they're going to burn her with fire. Is it going to be Rome itself, or is it going to be where she has her cathedrals? Well, I don't know. We'll have to see. It could be both. Verse 9, the kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived sensuously with her, spiritually speaking, will weep and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning. Standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. There has never been a time in man's history that we could understand that, except since what, the mid-50s? What could that possibly be? It's not biological warfare. It's not chemical warfare. It would have to be nuclear warfare in 1 hour, which is a short period, very short period of time, in one day. In 1 hour of one day, and and everybody stands at a safe distance. Why? Radiation. You can't get too close. Back in the 50s, they had tested out there in Nevada, and they had troops out there, the trenches, and they sit there and you put goggles on so that the initial blast would not put their eyes out. And then they start walking out there on the desert a little bit and not knowing that they're walking into trouble and into radiation. Going on here in verse 11, and the merchants of the earth will keep and mourn over her, for no one buys their merchandise anymore. Well, there goes our business. Merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones and pearls and fine linen and purple, silk and scarlet, every kind of citron wood, every kind of object of ivory, every kind of object of most precious wood, bronze, iron, and marble, things of wealth. This has been a religion and a church of extreme wealth. Verse 13, and the cinnamon and incense, fragrant oil and frankincense, wine and oil, fine flour, wheat, cattle, sheep, horses, chariots, bodies, and souls of men. Owned everything. Tremendous investments here. The fruit that your soul longed for has gone from you, merchants, and all the things which are rich and splendid have gone from you, and you shall find them no more at all. The merchants of these things who became rich by her will stand at a distance for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing at a distance. You don't want to get too close to that when you see that mushroom cloud going up. Verse 16 saying, alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, for in 1 hour such great riches came to nothing. Now, by the way, I said earlier, we don't know how long an hour is. I don't think it's just 60 minutes. But it's something within 1 day. Didn't we just read that up there? That in 1 hour of 1 day, yes, in verse 10, for in 1 hour, I know I read 1 day here, and I'll read it again. It'd be in 1 hour of 1 day. This is going to happen suddenly. Isaiah said, and you will not know where it comes from. One other one, I don't know if you take the time or not, but in Jeremiah, both 50 and 51, it talks about the Medes. And the Medes taking Babylon out. Now, Darius the Mede was the one who led them through the gate, I believe. Cyrus was the Great was over all, but he wasn't the one that went through the gates on the river to go into Babylon in 539. But he was the one in charge overall who took it, yes. But who are the Medes today? I remember reading in, I think it was in the Dr. Hayes Compendium years ago, many of the descendants of the Medes are in the areas of Eastern Europe and in particular the Ukraine. Now, I can't say I can prove that one way or the other. I know that's one area that we have looked at and stated as where the descendants of the Medes are today. Who would want to obliterate this religious system in 1 hour of 1 day? I don't know of any other way that can be done, except either a jet plane or a missile with a nuclear warhead could do that. It is not any conventional warfare of World War II style or Vietnam War time that could do what the Bible describes is going to happen in that short of a time. Let's go and finish here. Verse 17, for in 1 hour such great riches came to nothing. Every shipmaster, all who travel by ship, sailors, and as many as trade on the sea, stood at a distance. Oh yeah. It's the third verse we've read where they stand at a distance. And cried out when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, what is like this great city? They saw the smoke of her burning. They threw dust on their heads and cried out, weeping and wailing and saying, Alas, alas, that great city in which all who had ships on the sea became rich by her wealth, for in 1 hour she is made desolate. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you, holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you on her. You see what God thinks of it. And vengeance is his, and in his time and his plan, it's going to be carried out. Verse 21, Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, Thus with violence the great city Babylon shall be thrown down and shall not be found any more. The first Babylon is not near the sea. The second one is not that far. If you're on a Mediterranean cruise, there's a port, I forgot the name of it, where they come into, and then you can take a short bus trip down to tour Rome on that particular 7 or 14-day Mediterranean cruise. Verse 22, The sound of harpists, musicians, flutists, and trumpeters shall not be heard in you anymore. No craftsman of any craft shall be found in you anymore, and the sound of a millstone shall not be heard in you anymore. The light of a lamp shall not shine in you anymore, and the voice of the bridegroom and bride shall not be heard in you anymore. For your merchants were the great men of the earth. And it's true. And some of the membership is just amazing to me. Who know and understand, and yet that's what they want to be part of. For by your sorcery all the nations were deceived, and in her was found the blood of prophets and saints and of all who were slain on the earth. And God's vengeance will come at that time, at the end, and right at the time of the return of Christ. The 10 kings are going to cause fire, to attack with fire, obviously weapons of some kind. Also, you'll find, let's see, we got a moment. Let's go back quickly. Jeremiah 51. Jeremiah 51. And of course, Jeremiah saw the first Babylon, didn't he? And it conquered Jerusalem when he was there. And get here. Jeremiah 51. A few verses here. I'll just read verse 8. Babylon has suddenly fallen and been destroyed. Wail for her. Take balm for her pain. Perhaps she may be healed. Verse 11. Make the arrows bright. Gather the shields. The Lord has raised up the spirit of the kings of the Medes, for his plan is against Babylon to destroy it, because it is the vengeance of the Lord, the vengeance for his temple. What is his temple today? The church, the saints. What did it say back there, the last verse or so of chapter 18? Rejoice, you apostles and all, for this, because it's God's vengeance. Verse 25, Behold, I am against you, O destroying mountain, kingdom, government, who destroys all the earth, says the Lord, and I will stretch out my hand against you, roll you down from the rocks and make you a burnt mountain. It sits, by the way, doesn't it, on 7 hills or mountains, whatever. Verse 28, Prepare against her the nations with the kings of the Medes, its governors and all its rulers, all the land of his dominion. Prepare the Medes to take Babylon down. Finally, verse 33, For thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, the daughter of Babylon is like a threshing floor when it is time to thresh her, yet a little while, and the time of her harvest will come. And a lot of that, it just seems, it really blends right in there with Revelation 18 of what's going to happen. And yes, as it said there in verse 11, it has fallen. Isaiah said that in Isaiah 13 too. And then that was quoted again by Christ to John in the book of Revelation. All right, we're going to stop there. And next month we'll be getting into chapter 19 and 20. Fall holy days, right? All are pictured there. Okay, we'll have a final hymn and prayer.